with Obama. You know, Obama talked on the campaign trail of the fierce urgency of now. Seems like the fierce urgency of yesterday. Maybe it was the fierce urgency to get elected. He did tell us that Martin Luther King used the expression the fierce urgency of now, but he didn't tell us in what speech. Because the speech in which Dr. King used the expression the fierce urgency of now was the Riverside Church speech in 1967. The speech where Martin Luther King came out against the Vietnam War, where Martin Luther King said the United States was the single greatest purveyor of violence in the world. The speech in which Dr. King railed against the evil giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism. And how ironic it is then that Barack Obama comes in and lifts up the Pentagon's budget to now $700 billion every year. And that he said in his State of the Union speech that there's going to be a freeze across the board in discretionary spending for every social program and every department, but not for the Pentagon. You know, those of us who voted for Barack Obama were not voting for a president to freeze social spending. We didn't need him for that. Those of us who voted for him didn't vote for him so we could have a president who would say the only engine in America for job creation will always be America's business. We didn't elect President Obama, and we did elect President Obama, let's be clear about that. The left brought Obama to power. The unions brought him to power. Young people brought him to power. African Americans brought him to power. Latinos brought him to power. Progressives brought him to power. But we didn't bring him to power for all of that. We didn't bring him to power to threaten Iran. We didn't bring him to power to say in a speech that we need more nuclear power, or that we need more offshore drilling, or that we need more clean coal, whatever that is. So he hasn't really met a lot of our expectations. The expectations were too high. But he hasn't met his own, maybe he's met his own expectations, I don't know. He hasn't met the expectations, he hasn't met the objectives that were needed. He hasn't met the demand of the day, the demand of our time. And we can see that in several big issues. We see it in the war in Afghanistan that is a disaster and to be an increasing disaster. We see it in the economy. He was warned before he submitted his stimulus program. He was warned by Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner. He was warned by Paul Krugman of the New York Times, another Nobel Prize winning economist. He was warned by the great economist Dean Baker, great progressive economist, that if the economic stimulus package wasn't not $700 billion, but 1.4 or 1.5 trillion dollars, that there'd be 10% unemployment by the end of 2009, and we have 10% unemployment now. And that is not only an economic error, it is a moral error. To let 15 million people be unemployed, to let their lives and their hopes of their lives come crushing down, it is an act of callousness that has to be called out. And the unemployment rate is predicted to be in the upper 9% for months and months now. People are suffering. People are being kicked out of their homes. And he has acted distant, indifferent almost to this plight. And with the banking crisis was another huge failing that he had. Here we had the banks that drove the economy, the world economy, into the ditch. And Bush first and then Obama bailed the bankers out. They didn't need to bail the bankers out. The United States overpaid already for Citibank. We should own Citibank today. We should have, Obama, if you wanted to meet the fierce urgency of now, would have nationalized Citibank and Bank of America. We overpaid for them already. And if we owned them, we could have used those banks to help people in this country. And if he wasn't willing to take that step, even though some right-wingers and Alan Greenspan even were saying maybe we should nationalize a couple of these banks. If he wasn't even going to do that, he at the very least should have, when the banks were crawling on their hands and knees for money from Washington, money from us, trillions of dollars from us, the least he could have said, well, if you're going to get the people's money, you need to do something for the people. You need to freeze foreclosures for a year. You need to stop raising interest rates on those mortgages you swindled people into taking. You need to put a ceiling on those credit cards that you're charging people exorbitant rates on. You need to reduce the principal on some of these mortgages by 20, 25, or 30% across the board. None of that. The banks weren't asked to do a goddamn thing. Except a little ceiling on executive pay, which was a bone they threw to us, as though that should satisfy us, when these same banks are the ones that are throwing people into foreclosure by a couple million a year. You're not going to have a recovery with 15 million people unemployed and 2 million, 3 million people every year losing their homes. That's not going to happen. People are in trouble, and Obama has not met that. He hasn't met the requirements that we need for health care. This is a very exasperating thing. He said during the State of the Union speech, if anyone has a better idea for health care, that will take care of the people who don't have health insurance now and will stop the malpractices of the insurance industry, I want to hear it, he said. No, I thought Dennis Kucinich was going to jump out of his chair. Or Bernie Sanders, and say, what about single payer? They took single payer right off the table at the very beginning. Not only that, they took the second best alternative off the table, which is an option that 65% of the American people in poll after poll want, and that is Medicare for all who want it. If you want the private insurance industry, if you want your lousy private insurance policy, you can keep it. If you want to go to the government, Medicare, you can go there. That was never one of the public options that was on the table, and Obama played us for chumps. You know, he said, he mouthed, well, public option is something I'm for, but he never backed that up. He never said, I'm not going to sign a bill that doesn't have a public option. He sent Rahm Emanuel to, go sit on the lap of Senator Baucus and say, no public option is fine by me. He always said, it's just a sliver, just a little sliver of the whole package. So now we're left with this inadequate health care bill that's not going anywhere, that really at bottom is simply a giveaway to the insurance industries. We hear a lot, well, it's going to help people because it's going to outlaw discrimination against people for pre-existing conditions. No, it's not. Because in the Senate bill it says, yes, it says insurance companies can't discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions, but it can cancel policies if people have committed fraud or haven't filled out their forms correctly. And that's what the insurance companies have always done when they didn't want to cover someone. Remember in one of Obama's speeches, he talked about the woman with breast cancer who was declined coverage time and time again until about a month before she died. She was declined coverage because she didn't disclose that she had treatment for acne. Well, they can do that again. They can say, sorry, you didn't disclose it. And so that's where